As I sit here, watching the mother of my children prepare dinner for the family, I find myself wondering, is it possible to rebuild what we once had? Can love be rekindled after everything that's happened? I don't have the answer. For now, I'll continue to live in this carefully controlled arrangement, enjoying the power and the illusion of normalcy. Whether it's sustainable or not is a question for another day. All I know is that this is our life now, a fragile balance of power, control, and the faint hope that something resembling love might one day emerge from the ruins. Before we dive into this emotional story of love, betrayal, and self-discovery, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories that will move, inspire, and keep you hooked. Let's get started. 9 years ago, life seemed stable, if not perfect. My wife and I had been married for over a decade, raising 2 beautiful children in what appeared to be a happy household. But as the years passed, cracks began to form in our relationship. Cracks I didn't notice. At the time, I worked as a manager in a logistics firm, often staying late to meet deadlines or secure promotions that would ensure our family's financial security. My wife, however, never complained about feeling lonely. But then came the day my friend, Daniel, sat me down at a coffee shop, his face pale and his voice trembling. "I need to tell you something," he began. "You're not going to like it." "What is it?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "My wife and I saw Sarah last weekend. She was with someone at a hotel." At first I laughed. "You've got to be kidding me. Sarah, my wife, was many things but unfaithful? Impossible." "I wish I was," Daniel said, sliding his phone across the table. The screen showed a blurry but unmistakable image of my wife walking into the hotel lobby, her arm linked with another man's. The moment I saw that photo, my world began to unravel. That night, I stared at Sarah as she cooked dinner, laughing with the kids as if nothing had happened. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, but doubt gnawed at me. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't focus at work. I was distracted, irritable, and distant. Finally, I hired a private investigator, unable to confront her without concrete proof. The investigator's report was thorough, leaving no room for doubt. Photos of Sarah meeting the same man at different locations, records of phone calls between them, and screenshots of texts that were far too intimate for friends. When I finally had the evidence in hand, I felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. This was the woman I had built my life with, the mother of my children. I confronted her one evening after the kids had gone to bed. My voice shook as I asked, "Is there something you're hiding from me?" She looked up from her book, feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb, Sarah. I know about the man you've been seeing." Her face turned pale, and her hands began to tremble. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She denied it, of course. I slammed the PI's folder onto the table, its contents spilling out. I showed her captures from her chats and texts, but Sarah kept saying those weren't hers. I showed her lots of stuff, and she denied everything to the point it was ridiculous, all while she claimed that I was an awful husband for thinking she would do that and not trusting her. I showed her photos of she getting in and out in hotel and kissing that man, and she started to cry. She started justifying her actions and was saying things like, "It's not like that. It's not my fault. You don't understand. It was your fault. I was lonely. I never loved him. You're never at home." "Don't you dare blame this on me," I shot back. "You could have talked to me about this." "You don't understand how hard it is to be alone," she screamed. "And you don't understand what it means to be loyal," I replied, my voice filled with disgust. I can explain," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "There's nothing to explain," I said coldly. "You lied. You betrayed me and this family." For weeks, we lived in a state of limbo. I refused to touch her, speak to her, or even look at her unless it was about the kids. She begged for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to give her any. The children began to notice the tension. Our daughter, Emma, asked one night, "Why are you and Mom fighting?" I had no answer. After consulting a lawyer, I filed for divorce. I told Sarah I wanted her out of my house, that I had already spoken to a lawyer, and we were getting divorced. At first, she tried to play the victim. Her tears and begging filled the room as she pleaded with me to reconsider. But when she saw that her manipulation wasn't working, everything changed. Her demeanor turned cold, and anger replaced her fake vulnerability. She accused me of betrayal, saying I had no right to do this to her. "Why aren't you fighting to save our marriage? Do I mean that little to you?" she shouted. Then came the threats. She warned me that if I went through with the divorce, she'd take the kids and the house. "Courts are always on the woman's side," she said smugly, as though she had already won. But I wasn't going to let her intimidate me. I stood firm and told her that she'd better start looking for another place to live. This was my house, and she had destroyed any chance of staying in it. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever faced. She was a whirlwind of emotions, disgusted that I had caught her in her lies, furious that I wasn't willing to work things out, and vindictive because I refused to let her control the narrative. Every day, I reminded her that our marriage was over and that she needed to leave. And every day, her behavior grew worse. She would lash out at me, yelling and slamming doors. She made no effort to hide her contempt, but I didn't care anymore. I had made up my mind. Then came the day when I completely lost it. I was sitting in my room, trying to block out her shouting, when I suddenly heard my daughter crying. It was a sound that pierced through me, and I ran to her room to see what was happening. The sight that greeted me was one I'll never forget. My daughter was on the floor, tears streaming down her face as she covered half of it with her hands. Her mother stood towering over her, screaming at her. "You're no one to judge or question me," she yelled. "I'm your mother, and I'm always right." The sheer venom in her voice made my blood boil. I had tolerated her mistreatment of me, but seeing her treat our daughter like that was too much. I stepped in between them and told her to back off. "You don't get to treat her like this," I said firmly. "This is exactly why you need to leave." My daughter looked up at me, her face full of fear and confusion. It broke my heart to see her like that, and I knew in that moment that I had to protect her no matter what. My daughter overheard us arguing that evening and, curious and upset, asked her mother why I wanted a divorce. Instead of responding with any semblance of calm or maturity, my wife exploded in rage. She turned on our 9-year-old daughter and, to my shock and horror, slapped her across the face with full force. The sound of the slap echoed through the room, and my daughter's stunned expression broke something inside me. I lost it. I can't say for certain how furious I must have looked, but whatever my expression conveyed, it was enough to stop my wife's tantrum dead in its tracks. For the first time in a long while, I saw fear in her eyes, fear of me. Through gritted teeth, I told her she had to leave the house that very night. I made it clear, if I returned and she was still there would be consequences. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My rage was ice cold, and the intensity of my words carried the weight of a final ultimatum. Without waiting for her response, I grabbed my daughter and my son and left for my parents' house. I couldn't let my children stay another minute in the same space as her. On the way, I took my daughter to the hospital to ensure she hadn't sustained any serious injury. The slap had left a red welt on her cheek, and I took photos to document what had happened. I needed to protect my children, and I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. The next day, I returned home, half expecting her to be gone. But she wasn't. She was still there, defiant as ever. My fury reignited. The image of my daughter's tear-streaked face and the sound of that slap played on a loop in my mind. I wanted to hurt my wife in a way that mirrored the pain she had inflicted on our family. Not physically, but emotionally. I decided to start by exposing her affair, a secret she had guarded so carefully. I gathered all the evidence I had of her infidelity, texts, photos, and anything else incriminating, and sent it directly to the wife of the man she was seeing. He was a man with a lot to lose, a good reputation, powerful connections, and a polished public image. By the time I was done, the fallout had already begun. He lost friends, important business contacts, and his pristine reputation was tarnished. Gossip spread like wildfire, leaving them both scrambling to contain the damage. Later that afternoon, my wife called me hysterical. She screamed into the phone, asking how I could do such a thing. She accused me of having no right to expose their affair, claiming I had gone too far. Her self-pity and indignation only fueled my resolve. I calmly told her this was just the beginning. I had endured enough of her lies, betrayal, and toxicity. If she didn't leave my life completely, things would only get worse for her. My message was clear. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control, protecting my children, and ensuring we never had to endure her cruelty again. I sent her out that day, and she moved in with her mother. I didn't stop there. I made sure her family knew everything. Every message, every piece of evidence. I sent it all to them. Her betrayal wasn't just my burden to carry anymore. It was up to them to decide what they would do with it. Her family's reaction was far from supportive. She was raised by a single mom, and the story of her family was one of heartbreak and resilience. Her father had cheated on her mother and abandoned them when she was young, leaving a deep scar in their lives. Infidelity was a sensitive and unforgivable topic in their household, and now she had become the very thing her mother despised most. Knowing that she was following in her father's footsteps made her situation unbearable for them. Her mother didn't mince words. She kicked her out of the house almost immediately, refusing to shelter someone who had betrayed her family's values. With nowhere to go, she turned to her brother for help. But even he wouldn't stand by her for long. "I'm disgusted by you," he said, letting her stay for only a couple of weeks before asking her to leave. Desperate, she reached out to the man she had cheated with, but he proved to be no better. His own life was in shambles, and whatever fleeting connection they had was meaningless to him now. He turned his back on her just as easily as she had turned her back on me. In his eyes, she was disposable, and he threw her away like trash. With nowhere else to go, she eventually moved into a small, rundown apartment. It was all she could afford. She started working tirelessly to pay the bills. But her new life was a far cry from the comfort and stability she once had. Her downward spiral began there. Slowly but surely, she started to lose everything. Her friends distanced themselves, either too ashamed to associate with her or unwilling to be caught up in the drama. Her family refused to see her, leaving her utterly isolated. Even our children, who had once adored their mother, began to resent her. They didn't understand the full story, but they knew enough to feel betrayed. The bond they shared with her began to wither, replaced by anger and confusion. And that was only the second year of this mess. She tried to date again, likely in a desperate attempt to fill the void and rebuild her life. But it only led to more heartbreak. The men she met either used her for what they could get or disappeared when they realized her situation. Others took advantage of her vulnerability, manipulating her and leaving her worse off than before. Her attempts to find solace only deepened her despair. From what I could tell, she was slipping further and further into depression, each failure chipping away at her sense of self-worth. By the third year, she thought she had hit rock bottom, but life still had more to throw at her. She began to realize that she had surrounded herself with toxic people. They weren't friends, they were opportunists. As soon as they learned about her past, they turned on her. Rumors spread like wildfire, tarnishing her reputation further. These so-called friends humiliated her, mocked her, and exploited her vulnerabilities for their own amusement. She had nothing left. No support system, no sense of belonging, no hope. Her family disowned her, her friends abandoned her, and even her children wanted nothing to do with her. She was completely alone, trapped in a life that was nothing like the one she had before. Her descent into misery was slow, but inevitable. Each passing day seemed to bring her closer to the realization of what she had lost. Not just her marriage, but the respect and love of everyone around her. And the worst part was that she had no one to blame but herself. By the time she truly hit bottom, it was too late to undo the damage. The weight of her choices had crushed her, leaving her with little more than regret and sorrow. The life she had built, the people who had cared for her, and the future she could have had, all of it was gone, replaced by loneliness and despair. 5 years down the line, she came back. Sarah stood at my doorstep, her face streaked with tears, and her demeanor was one of complete desperation. She was quite literally begging on her knees for forgiveness. It was a sight I hadn't expected to see, even in my wildest imagination. Through sobs, she poured out her regret. She cried about how sorry she was, how much she regretted everything she had done, and how empty her life had become. She admitted that she had nothing, no family, no friends, and no purpose. "I haven't felt happy since the divorce," she confessed. Her voice trembled as she spoke of how much she missed me, our family, our marriage. "I was so happy with you, with us," she said, tears streaming down her face. She promised she would do anything to earn a second chance. She vowed to obey me without question, to devote herself entirely to fixing what she called the worst mistake of her life. She wanted her life back, our family, our kids, and she would do whatever it took to make that happen. Her words stirred something within me, but I wasn't ready to forgive her so easily. The betrayal, the lies, the pain she had caused, it all lingered. I still resented her. So, I decided to test her sincerity. "How do I know you're being honest?" I asked. "How can I trust that this isn't just another lie?" She looked up at me, defeated. "I have nothing to offer you," she said. "Nothing except my obedience, my heart, and my body." Her words were raw, almost pitiful, but I could see the truth in her eyes. She was serious. Without another word, I took her to the bedroom. What followed was as much a test for her as it was a release for me. Sarah didn't hesitate. She never said no, not once. Her face reflected something I hadn't seen in years, genuine happiness. She was entirely submissive, giving herself to me completely. And when it was over, she broke down in tears, but this time they were tears of joy. "Thank you," she whispered through her sobs. "Thank you for giving me a chance. I promise you, I'll do anything for you. I'll dedicate my life to being the perfect wife." In the days that followed, I laid down the rules. If she was serious about earning back her place in my life, she would have to prove it. I drafted a contract, detailing every expectation and boundary. She signed it without hesitation. She accepted everything. Sarah was dead set on showing me she was serious. To the outside world, we appeared as a couple who had overcome immense struggles to find our way back to one another. Friends and acquaintances marveled at our second chance and commented on how lovely we seemed together. Sarah played her part perfectly. She managed to rebuild her relationship with our children, piece by piece, showing them the affection and attention she had once neglected. But behind closed doors, the reality was far different. Sarah had become entirely subservient. She had given herself over to me in every sense of the word. I controlled every aspect of her life, and she willingly accepted it. To ensure she never forgot her place, I made certain that she had nothing to call her own. Nothing was in her name, no property, no accounts, nothing. She didn't have a job, nor did she have the freedom to seek one. That, too, was part of our agreement. She had promised to dedicate herself solely to the home and the children, and she upheld that promise without complaint. We attended events, dinners, movies, and vacations as a couple. To the casual observer, we seemed like the picture of happiness, a couple who had fought through their struggles and emerged stronger. Sarah smiled in public, laughed at the right moments, and held my hand as though we were still in the honeymoon phase of our relationship. But every smile she offered was a mask, and every laugh carried the weight of her reality. She had her life back, yes, but it was on my terms. At home, she followed my rules without question. I made sure she understood that this second chance was a privilege, not a right. She cooked, cleaned, cared for the kids, and managed the house with meticulous dedication. Every aspect of her day revolved around ensuring my satisfaction and the well-being of our family. The power dynamic was unbalanced, and I intended to keep it that way. Sarah understood this, and she didn't fight it. She accepted her new role, perhaps because she truly regretted what she had done, or perhaps because she believed it was the only way to redeem herself. Whatever her reasons, she had committed herself fully to this life. For me, the situation was complicated. Part of me still resented her for the betrayal, for the years of pain and mistrust. But another part of me found satisfaction in seeing her work so hard to make amends. I had control now, and she had none. It was a constant reminder of the choices she had made and the consequences that followed. Sometimes, after a particularly pleasant day out, she'll tentatively bring up the idea of remarriage. "Do you think maybe we could get married again someday?" she asked once, her voice trembling with hope. I didn't even look at her as I replied, "You know the deal. We'll talk about it after our youngest turns 25. Until then, don't ask again." Her face fell, but she nodded, accepting my answer without complaint. It's the same every time. I remind her that I don't trust her, and those words are enough to crush any fight she might have left. Occasionally, I test her limits. A few times, I've brought other women into the house, friends, colleagues, and even casual dates. I never crossed any boundaries in front of Sarah, but the implication was clear. I could if I wanted to. I'm still single in every sense that matters. Sarah's reaction is always the same. She remains silent, lowering her eyes and retreating to another room. Her compliance, her complete lack of protest, only serves to remind me of the power I hold over her. Once, she worked up the courage to ask, "Do you enjoy hurting me like this?" I looked her in the eye and said coldly, "I enjoy making sure you never forget what you did." Yet, despite everything, there are moments when the walls between us come down. When I touch her, when I kiss her, she responds with a desperation that's almost heartbreaking. She gives herself to me completely, as if hoping that these fleeting moments of intimacy will bring us closer. "Do you still love me?" she whispered once, her voice barely audible in the dark. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the truth is I don't know. I don't hate her anymore. The anger and bitterness that fueled my revenge have faded, replaced by something far more complex. But love? I'm not sure if I'm capable of loving her again. Our daughter is now 18, preparing to leave for college, and our son is 15. They've grown up in this carefully constructed illusion of a happy family, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents beneath the surface. As I watch them grow, I can't help but think about the future. Sarah and I have 10 more years until our youngest turns 25, the arbitrary deadline I set for any chance of remarriage. By then, will I have learned to love her again? Or will I decide that this arrangement has run its course? Sometimes I imagine what it would be like to walk away entirely, to tell the world that, despite our best efforts, things didn't work out. to leave Sarah to figure out her own life while I move on to something new. But for now, I'm content to let things remain as they are. I enjoy watching her work tirelessly to be the perfect wife and mother, knowing that she does it all for my approval. I've come to enjoy this control I have over her life. It's not about revenge anymore. It's about ownership. She is mine in every sense that matters, and I've made sure she understands that. Sarah, for her part, seems happy living this way. She's found solace in the structure I've created, in the chance to redeem herself even if it's on my terms. If you found this story gripping, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more thought-provoking tales. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.